Hello everyone and welcome to today's session, Future Trends in Identity and Access Management. I am Shilpa Goswami and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions during the webinar to organizers or our speaker, use the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio video challenges, please check your internet connections or you may log out and log in again. Our speaker for today's session, Tejas Shroff. He is currently the Senior Director of Managed Security Services at NTT Data, managing the identity and access management practice. He is also an adjunct professor at the University of Texas at Dallas, where he teaches various cybersecurity courses to graduate students at the Jindal School of Management. He is a board member of FBI-affiliated non-profit InfraGard National, serves on the advisory board for Collin College's cybersecurity program, and mentors the UTD Cybersecurity Club. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Tejas.
Thanks, Shilpa, for the introduction. So this means I can skip the next slide. So, thank you everyone for attending. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what identity and access management is, but we all, without realizing, we all deal with it on a daily basis. Each one of us has an identity. Even if you don't have a digital identity, I'm here to talk about digital identity and access management. But if you don't have a digital identity, you still have a physical identity. So identity goes with us. We all deal with a couple of others in our day-to-day life. We have somewhere we get authenticated. Like I said, even in the physical world, we still get authenticated. We have our ID cards that we carry. If people in US have social security cards, driver's license, that's your identity. You in India, you may have your driver's license, you may have your PAN card, your Aadhaar cards. Everywhere globally, you have your passports, your driver's licenses, anything that qualifies you as the person you are saying who you are. That's your identity. That's your authentication. Authorization means we all have different identities, but at the same time, it doesn't mean just by you having a driver's license, you are authorized to do something. Just by having a passport, your authorization comes from visa. If you have a passport, you're traveling to a country, your authorization is the visa. So likewise, in our case, you have your authentication, which is done through in digital identity. You have your username and password, but what you have access to is determined by authorization. So going back, your digital or physical identity is where you are the unique person or device that acts within a particular system. The fact of being who you are or what a person or thing is determined by your identity. Then there is another term called identity provider, which validates whether your credentials are correct. It allows you to authenticate and authorize, and it basically creates, maintains, and manages your identity information. Something like an Okta, something like an Active Directory that will allow you to get through your identity provider. And then options for assessing a person's identity is your username, your attribute, your smart card, etc. So there is a concept of something called as I and then the four A's, which is for identification, which identification is a process of proving your identity. Then you have authentication, authenticating against a particular system. Then you have authorization, determining that you have the right access, auditing, and then accountability. So identity and access management system has been around for a while. But things changed when we had COVID. Earlier, people used to be governed by the network. You went into the office, you were bound by the perimeters of a network. You could actually be sitting outside the building and trying to remote in, and you would have to possibly use something like a VPN or some other sources to connect. Once COVID hit, all of a sudden you had to be moved to wherever you are in the world, you could be able to connect to the network. You should be able to connect to the network. All of a sudden, the world changed. And instead of network governing who you are or what your boundaries are, identity became the center of the universe. So what we call it is identity is the new perimeter. What that means is identity is governing the boundaries of where you can work from, and which as long as you are able to identify yourselves, authenticate yourselves, and have the right authorization, you could work from anywhere. So that was a big change. Yes, it was happening. It was not something which was developed during the COVID pandemic, but identity and access management became the center of the universe during the pandemic, more so. And now it's become even more and more because now people are connecting from multiple devices. People are no longer with the advent of cloud based software and the proliferation of it. People are starting to connect more and more from any device, anytime, and they want the user experience to be the same. You could connect from your phone, you could connect from your tablet, your laptop. If you go into office, maybe you have a desktop, all those things, and you want your user experience to be the same. So all of a sudden, identity and access management uh, took a lot of precedence. You have something called as identity and access management ecosystem, where you manage your digital identities, you get your user access to data. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the term single sign-on, which allows users to authenticate with multiple systems using one login or set of credentials. Multi-factor authentication. So when the world moved with identity as your core component, multi-factor authentication became very critical. A lot of you are calling it OTP. A lot of you are calling it uh, the phone-based authentication. You had back in the days, you had smart IDs and smart cards, secure IDs, smart cards. So it's not like all these things were developed during COVID. All these things became much more powerful and much more needed during the COVID timeframe. Not just COVID, but also the rising nature of the ransomware attacks, rising nature of the data breaches has made sure that multi-factor authentication is uh, one of the ways to go. It's no longer if, but it is become the need. It's no longer a wish list. It is something you have to have. And then there are two other terms which I'd like to bring up. One is called identity governance and administration, which allows you to govern your identity from a single pane of glass, a single dashboard, which allows organizations to more effectively mitigate identity related access risks. If you look at some of the data, and I have some data which I've put, but you can look at that, you'd know that identity related access risks are among the highest when it comes to somebody trying to break into your environment. They can actually get into your environment using stolen privileges, using escalated privileges. Somebody gets into the account, somebody gets into the network, they try to find some privileges which will allow them to move across the environment and cause the damage. We all know that uh, we have protected our files, but our files need to be accessed using some special privileges. And the hackers or the bad actors get into the environment, they try to uh, either elevate or uh, even use sometimes lateral privileges to access uh, things which they are not supposed to be accessing. So if you look at a core world of security, then they are definitely violating your CIA principles, your confidentiality, your integrity, and your availability principle. So identity governance and administration enables organizations, and I will get to identity governance and administration also a little bit more in detail. But let me first talk about what you call it as a privileged access management. There are number of user accounts which are like the admin accounts, local admins, domain admins, and then you also have service accounts which carry the privileged access. Sometimes machine to machine communication happens device to device using service accounts. Uh, Users connect using domain admin accounts, and these are the privileged accounts. And the privileged access is basically the one which needs to be curtailed, it needs to be restricted so that uh, anyone and everyone cannot have access. And this does not apply only to the outside world, this also applies to the internal users. In the world of identity, we follow the rule of least privilege. If you don't need to know something, you don't need to have access to that. Only on a need basis, you should have the access. If you are not supposed to be an admin, you should not have elevated privilege. You should have the principle of least privilege followed. You only grant people the access, bare minimum of what they need. You are empowering them by giving them higher level of access, and that can lead to your downfall. So we definitely need to make sure that people only have the access what they need to have. Since we are going to talk about the IAM trends, I first wanted to touch up on the IAM trends for 2023. These are some of the buzzwords which people on this webinar or in the industry might have heard. IAM modernization. As I said, pandemic changed a lot of things. IAM needs to be modernized. We need to go from IAM. We went from, there was an IAM 1.0, we went from IAM 1.0 to 2.0 to now 3.0. We are moving forward in the IAM journey. We are moving forward in the IAM lifecycle. Zero trust architecture. Zero trust is a buzzword which has been around for the last few years, but what it says is if you authenticated one time, doesn't mean you're good. It should be a continuous authentication, continuous validation. So zero trust architecture is something that has been taking uh, lot of activities are around zero trust architecture. Zero trust means never trust, always verify. 1980s, President Ronald Reagan had come up with a term called trust but verify. This is an improvement on that by saying never trust, always verify. Converged identity talks about as we are moving into this world, we are almost going into the early 2000s and the late 90s when a lot of ERP companies had come out with. Every company had their own sweet spot. SAP was specializing in manufacturing, Oracle had the financials, PeopleSoft had the HR modules. But as the investments grew, as people started putting their money in a particular tool, there was a need for an integrated end-to-end solution, not just one particular module. So what SAP started doing is they started getting into Oracle space and PeopleSoft space and the other way around. Oracle actually did a step further by going and purchasing PeopleSoft. So they had two big modules under their own umbrella. But same way, identity started in the world with every company coming out with one solution. But as we are growing, there is a need for converged identity. So companies are starting to, I wouldn't say encroach, but I would use the word step into the other territories, somewhat unfamiliar earlier, but um, in extension so that they can have an end-to-end converged identity solution. So the companies which specialized in the core access management started getting into the IGA. Companies in the IGA world also started to add the privileged access management. Companies like Microsoft, which are a core component of Active Directory, started going into the world of IGA and access management. So there is a lot of convergence which is happening in this space because again, everyone is looking for if they can standardize on the number of vendors, then they can have a better unified solution. Biometric authentication, which has become a big into the world of MFA. One of the things which a lot of companies have been talking about is going passwordless. What passwordless does is it takes away the burden of changing passwords every 6 months, every whatever the duration it may be, making sure people remember their last passwords. A lot of times, some companies have done the research to show that by changing passwords, you're actually making yourselves vulnerable because sometimes you don't remember the password you changed. Either you write it down somewhere, which is not a good practice, or you go ahead and uh, keep on making mistakes, and then somebody like some keyloggers or some other ways people can get access to your passwords. Another tendency of people with passwords is we tend to use something that is known to us, something that is close to us as a part of our password. And that also means uh, we are not the only ones who know about that. There are other people who know about our families, people who know about our pets, and we make ourselves somewhat vulnerable. So there are, and you might say, oh, what if somebody tries to break in? No, but these days things are done using bots, things are done using brute forces. And if I take 100 things that are, if you might be my best friend and I know probably know 50 or 100 things about you, I make a list of those, put them into um, some brute force attack. Well, I'm not saying your friends are going to do that, but I'm just saying anyone can do that just for fun as well. And you can actually test this, and there might be a good chance you might be able to break through and get somebody's password. Another thing which the world is moving towards is decentralized identity ecosystem. Again, jury is out on that because it's still being developed. Some people think you should still stay with centralized. There's a school of thought which strongly believes it should be a decentralized identity. So things are evolving. The next bullet is something without which these days any presentation is incomplete. If you don't have these two words, rather these four words, then people start doubting your intelligence. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, these words, you have to throw it in somehow, and IAM is no different. More and more people are asking for AI, more and more people are asking for ML integration. We all know that cybersecurity is a huge pile of data. In order to pass through that, you need some better approach, better ways to pass through that pile of data. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, and we all know how difficult it can get. And the timeliness that you are able to find it, because otherwise you'll be spending time just on trying to find needle in that one haystack where somebody has gone and infected 50 other haystacks. So we just need to be very quick, and we need to have a way to identify and discard what doesn't need to be looked at. Cloud IAM, more and more, the whole world of digital transformation is revolving around cloud. So cloud IAM is again becoming bigger and bigger. Enhanced authentication is using um, ways like biometrics and the other ways to authenticate. As we are moving along from passwordless, so if you look at enhanced authentication, that does include a couple of other bullets which are also mentioned above: biometric, passwordless, other ways. API security, a lot of communication is going through APIs, so APIs need to be secure, especially if they are invoking your IAM functions. And the IoT devices bring a whole new machine identity pain points into the play, which possibly haven't been seen before, because we've been dealing with user identities. The last few years has been device to device communication, and that can only increase exponentially. So integration with IoT devices is becoming big. Another area which I've not mentioned here is the whole OT segment, the manufacturing segment, the operational technology controls. So they also need to be protected, because we know that OT can cause a lot bigger damage than what identity of users can be causing. As I mentioned, zero trust. Zero trust is a security framework that requires all users, whether inside or outside organization's network, to be authenticated, authorized, and continuously validated for security configuration and posture before being granted or keeping access to applications and data. That's that's a verbiage filled definition. The second bullet is possibly more important to understand, which is never trust, always verify. Somebody might come and say, I want to implement zero trust. Yes, you can. But zero trust is more of a framework. It's not like I'm buying a product to implement zero trust. It's a structure, it's a framework, it's an architecture move that you're doing to make sure that zero trust is implemented. The last bullet says one time validation won't suffice, because threats and user attributes are all subject to change. So if you look at it, you might just say that even within the identity world, there are two schools of thought. As I talked about, there's a school of thought which talks about centralized identity, and one talks about decentralized identity. If you think carefully, there is zero trust, and then there is single sign on, right? So zero trust tells you you have to authenticate and validate every time, while single sign on talks about signing on one time and leveraging that across multiple different systems, multiple different tabs. You shouldn't have to be authenticated again and again. So you might wonder which one is correct. There's no one answer to that. It's not like to do zero trust, you can have single sign on. There are ways to even augment your single sign on and still have like a zero trust principle in place. Zero trust, as I said, it's more of a mindset. Single sign on is more of a technical implementation. So there will be the trust boundaries which will be set up. There will be the guardrails which will be set up to make sure that you're not going away from single sign on just because you decided to implement zero trust. Because all these companies have invested in it. Possibly some of these same companies might be doing both these functions. But how they do that is again is evolving on a daily basis. As I said, identity has been around for a while, but identity was on the side. It was kind of an also ran from there. especially during pandemic, especially during the proliferation of the devices. It has already become center of the circle. It's in the core orbit, if you will, and that means that identity is something which is going to continuously evolve. So, single sign-on has been around for a while. Zero trust is a newer technology. As I said, various types of authentication methods are being devised and developed. So, all in all, we need to start merging these, need to start finding a lowest common denominator where people can actually um, standardize things on and embed the best principles of these practices together. This is what I was talking about the converged identity platform. This is just, I didn't draw this picture, I got it from somewhere, but at the same time, I wanted to put this out here by saying what is the need. If we look at the left side, it'll tells you a big data. I'm sure all of you know about Gartner. Gartner is saying that by 2025, 70% of new access management, governance, administration, and privileged access deployments will be converged identity and access management platforms. So Gartner is predicting that 70%, which is a significant number, will be going through a new, will be converged identity and access management platform. So what is converged identity? So as I said, IAM solutions are siloed. So their components are generally implemented to work independently. As I said, you have various individual towers. You have an access management, you have IGA, you have your privileged access management. So people who work in the industry would be able to attest to that fact. And when you are working across various vendors and various different technologies which are supported by various vendors, it gets into finger pointing. It gets into us versus them kind of a mindset. So we need to make sure that we have this converged view instead of having this fragmented view where your access rights, your policies, etc., need to be managed better. The other issue which comes with having multi vendors is sometimes your solution may not work with the other vendor's solution for everything. If you have a if you have a single vendor who's doing converged identity, that person can actually have a more unified view. They can possibly do it at the data model layer, whereby they can have a unified view of a converged identity and access. So converged IAM is designed to address all these challenges. It offers a more holistic approach to identity security. So looking at this, people might say, yeah, why not? We should just do a converged identity. What is the problem? Sometimes the vendors who specialize in one doesn't necessarily mean they'll be able to specialize in the other one, right? So the converged solution may not have all the bells and whistles that you might get by going to a more specialized vendor. Somebody who is standardized on doing things in a particular thing for privileged identity may not be able to do it in the world of identity access and governance, or vice versa. So, though, like if you look at this picture, you'd see all these different areas are converging into something called as converged IAM. And that's the approach that we want to take. But I just also want to be careful and warn you guys, even though this is a future trend, this is where things are headed. Gartner is predicting as early as 2025. My gut feel, being in the industry, that we are not there yet. Identity and access management solution implementation is not Um, like you go and buy antivirus software or a tax software for $50 or even probably cheaper in India, and you go and put it and implement that solution. No, these are solutions which require multi years. You work with multiple different vendors and you come up with these solutions. You implement that. So it's not that easy to change them. Once you have invested, when you're starting to realize the value of it, you don't feel like changing them. So um, I respect this data from Gartner, but at the same time, I still feel that we are not there yet. The other thing I would also say is there are other approaches, which again, Gartner is also suggesting there are various approaches that things like people implementing the lighter version of the solutions. You don't want to go with too many bells and whistles. There are solutions which you need to implement for your cyber insurance needs, for your audit needs. Uh, its identity solutions are actually being required for audit. You're no longer thinking about should I do this or when do I do this. It's more about when do I do this. You need to have that. Auditors are looking for these solutions to be implemented before signing off on your access control. There are also things related to access certification and the recertification needs. The compliance is actually dictating that you are doing your access certifications. And this would ensure that you are able to uh, continuously validate that you have done your due diligence in terms of making sure that your accesses are getting reviewed on a quarterly basis, on a half yearly basis, on an annual basis, and the right people have the right access. This is where the solutions like identity governance, which can help you manage your accesses in a single solution, are becoming more and more important. Because earlier, if you were doing manual user access, sometimes if you do not delete somebody's access, then you are leaving some audit trails in there. So the need of the hour is to make sure that you have a converged identity platform, but you value it if some of the converged identity where some of the solutions are added as an afterthought just to meet the market share, that is not the best solution. I'm not here to talk about any solutions. I'm talking about just the trends. So I'd probably refrain from getting and talking about any of the solutions. This is another area which I mentioned is becoming bigger and bigger, which is your machine and device identity management. It's the approach organizations need to take to manage credentials and keys that secure to access to your IoT devices. Now, we all are thinking IoT devices are needed, yes, but then there is a whole concept of another thing called as IIoT, industrial IoT devices. It's also called as operational technology. There are lots and lots of things which are used in your manufacturing where your machines are talking to machines. Uh, your things in your oil and gas segment, the various different industries, manufacturing, your infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, your core uh, infrastructure, your smart cities, all these have various devices or machines talking to each other. A lot of the bots, you're not humans are not talking to each other. As we move into the more and more automated world, we are dealing with the approach where the credentials and the keys that secure access to those IoT devices are very critical. Machine identities are responsible for governing the confidentiality and integrity of information between machines. I would actually add availability to that by saying even the availability, because Even though the confidentiality and integrity needs to be governed, you also need to make sure the machines are going to be available, because the jobs could be automated. If one of the machine is being knocked out, then you're not able to complete your automated job. Forrester being uh, another company like Gartner, who provides their own research, they're saying machine identities are growing at twice the rate of human identities, thanks to digital transformation, thanks to widespread adoption of Internet of Things. Each of us uh, might have like probably what 3 4 people living in the home. We might have like 20 different devices which are talking to each other in our homes. So you are able to associate and relate with this number, saying yes, machine identities in your homes are growing at the rate much faster than the human identity. You're not adding people in your home that easily as you're adding devices, right? Machine devices from refrigerators, medical equipment, they are all becoming digitally connected. Your thermostats, the Alexas in your home, the Google Pods, Apple Homes, uh, all those things are uh, proliferation of the devices in your home. Medical equipment, these days, if you look at it, so many different medical devices are talking to each other, right? Which is all part of our automation strategy, right? So various service accounts, various bots, robotic processes, they all need privileged access. So the problem is this offers a use case to identities to protect that privileged information. There are companies which are in the privileged access management space, which are coming out with solutions to protect machine privileged identities. So there is a whole new world of proliferation which is happening in the world of device identity management. Like I wanted to put this out there. It's a hype cycle for digital identity 2022. Hype cycle for 2023 is not yet been published. But if you look at it, um, again, this is not the best color, but it still shows you if the sky blue one is 2 to 5 year uh, horizon where the plateau will be reached. The navy blue one is 5 to 10 years. The yellow one is greater than 10 years. If you look at this, I don't see a single yellow, and I don't see anything which is obsolete before plateau, right? So, yes, there are a few in less than 2 years, lot of sky blue, lot of navy blue. I don't see any of these two, which is in a way good. We don't know anything about what will happen in greater than 10 years. I don't think identity works on those timelines. We have much shorter timelines. Yeah. Anybody who had been working on identity probably 5 years back, they can attest to the fact that the world has changed quite a bit. And the good news is nothing's becoming obsolete. So when I mentioned about your zero trust coming in, doesn't mean your single sign-on becomes obsolete. They have to work together. And things will happen when they'll start working together. The things like identity wallets being conceived, there's orchestration which is being done. As I said, IoT authentication is becoming big. Now you might wonder why it is greater than 5 to 10 years, because a lot of IoT devices are still being developed. So you don't expect that to plateau in the next 2 years. But machine identity management, yes, the principles might be put in place. FIDO deals with decentralized identity. So this is again just an indication of um, various things which are happening in the hype cycle. I said about some numbers. I put more numbers and I removed them because I was not able to validate. Again, these numbers are not saying that you hold somebody to this number that, hey, you said this, and by 2029, why is the number not at 40.87 billion? That number might grow faster, that number might go slower, but this is based on the trends. We're looking at a CAGR of 13.21%. So in 2022, the identity access management market was valued at 17.14 billion, which is not a small number by any means, but still expected to grow around 13-14%, making it a $41 billion industry by 2029. I think there is some good significant growth. This was another data which I found very interesting, and the number seemed pretty staggering that 37% of all breaches involve the use of stolen login credentials. And when I was talking to somebody, they said maybe the number is higher. Maybe the number is higher, but 37% of the breaches is where they actually confirmed that it was because of the stolen login credentials. We were at this particular number, and which is very significant number if you put things into perspective. It's not like one thing leads to a breach. There are various things which add up to that, and 37% is a pretty significant number. So I think at this point, Shilpa, I'd like to open it up. I know we probably are just in time for Q&A, so I wanted to just open it up uh, and
Yes,
have.
sure. Okay. Thank you very much, Tejas, for an informative session, and our attendees share the same sentiments. If you're interested to learn more about our program, do let us know in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training, and we will reach out to you soon. Tejas, shall we start with the Q&A?
Sure.
Okay. So our first question is, how is privileged identity management different from privileged access management by Edosji?
Okay. So I don't want to go into the technical details of privileged identity. Privileged identity management was uh, actually it is different in terms of the approaches. Privileged access management is what has been used more frequently. Privileged identity management was implemented by a company called Beyond Trust earlier, but even they themselves have moved away from that more towards the privileged access management, and they have the newer solutions. So privileged identity management was possibly more of a kind of a earlier solution, but right now the world has converged more towards privileged access management, including for the OT. And if I don't know who asked the question, if you want to reach out to me, I can share some material on that front personally with you.
Thank you, Tejas, for answering that question. Our next question is, AI is a learning machine. What's stop AI to learn and find a way to bypass passwordless access? By Robin Lee.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Uh, AI is a learning machine, but AI doesn't learn on it itself, right? So obviously you have to train AI. And uh, Robin, since you are asking this question, you are aware of some of the trends going on in the world. Like everyone jumps on the bandwagon by saying, "Hey, ChatGPT can do so much, generative AI can do so much." But we all know, and especially we in the world of cybersecurity know that if you train a machine to do something destructive, it can do destruction. So it is imperative that you you teach your AI to be able to understand these kinds of use cases. Somebody might try to leverage AI to do the passwordless, but passwordless means you're going to be able to get AI to do somebody's biometric authentication. How are you going to do that? Because passwordless is going to still require some sort of authentication, right? In order to do that, you would have to have AI have control over a lot of those biometrics and the other things, which may not be possible. But yes, I get your broader point that AI and ML, if they are trained incorrectly, they'll give you wrong results.
Thank you, Tejas, for answering that question. Our next question is how IAM is flexible enough while integrating multiple platforms across organizational units by Mohammad Hasib.
So IAM is flexible when it comes to, and if I understand your question, Hasib, I would say is how IAM is flexible in terms of uh, integrating multiple domains. Are you talking about multiple companies? Are you talking about multiple uh, solutions? But I'll try to take a stab at both. And like I said, anyone has any more questions, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll try my best to answer it. Yeah, I'm not here to talk about a particular tool, so I'll just keep it at the high level. You can integrate, and IAM can be that underlying layer because, like for instance, if you look at it, even your Active Directory, for instance, which falls under your IAM. So if you have multiple ADs which are integrated, or as long as they are being fed into the same source, like a Workday or some sort of a HR tool, you can have that as a single source of truth against which multiple domains could be integrated.
Thank you, Tejas. Our
Yeah.
next question is how to integrate IAM to control IoT devices in embedded system by Yogesh Sawant.
Yeah. So Yogesh, that's a good question. As I mentioned, there are solutions which are being deployed for IAM to control IoT devices, especially the IIoT and the OT devices. Even for the privileged access, as I mentioned, these days a lot of the privileged access solutions are being deployed for tools like CyberArk, etc., which are rolling out tools to manage the OT privileges. So that is where the next generation of focus is, where IAM is getting more and more, whereby you could actually have your device identities and uh, machine identities being controlled through the same pane of glass, which is your which is doing your user identities.
Thank you, Tejas, for answering that question. Our next question is what skills and experiences do you think are needed to start a career in IAM by Maria Line?
Yeah, so that's a broad question. First thing I would suggest is you try and narrow down within IAM. As I mentioned, the ecosystem has various components. You try and identify what is the thing that you'd like to do. There are various companies which are offering free and uh, other trainings which you can get. You can become like a tool certified person. There's no such thing as you can become an IAM expert overnight. It's like talking about boiling an ocean. You can try to become a functional IAM expert, but at the same time, you could have things related to access management, things related to IGA, things related to SSO MFA integration, also on the privileged access management. So these are some of the areas, as I mentioned, and I'll be glad if you reach out to me. I'll be able to point you to some of the tools that you can possibly try and pursue. Yeah. Shilpa, I'm going to possibly not get into too much details here because obviously uh, I think this requires more uh, kind of one-on-one communication.
Yes, Tejas, sure. I truly understand. Thank you for answering that question. Our next question is what is the best way to manage identity in the organization?
Um, Best practices, make sure people are trying to minimize their risk. They're trying to protect their identities. A lot of times we see people are sharing their passwords. Those are the low hanging fruits you need to control. People need to stop doing those things. Um, you want to make sure that you are taking your due diligence, you're minimizing your own risk, you're following the best practice principles. And I'm talking about the things which you can do. Managing the identities in an organization, obviously, it does require investment and commitment from your company side. But uh, there are certain things, even if you don't have state-of-the-art identity access management solution, if you might be using just the manual user account administration, you can still put together a lot of different controls from your own side to make sure that your IAM, your identities are protected in an organization. Obviously, organizations can do some basic things like how to store the identities, where to store the identities, how do they store in the clear, the passwords are stored or not stored, how do you authenticate, etc. But obviously, you are asking me who's running the practice of IAM, then I can say we obviously help out. And like I said, Carter has also come out with various other solutions like light solutions, which we are also implementing for our customers to make sure that we talk about where identity and access management can be uh, getting the right amount of ROI by putting that investment in. You're de-risking your uh, ability to be breached by putting simple solutions like privileged access management. You're meeting your cyber insurance needs. So obviously, those are the things where it will definitely help you.
Thank you, Tejas. We'll take last two questions for the day. Our next question is, can you please share your experience, any situation where it was difficult to implement a suitable IAM system? By Mayuri
Well,
Mahate.
yeah, Mayuri, it has always means uh, every single implementation is tough and it requires commitment from both sides. It's not like a customer decides to implement IAM. They walk in and they say that, hey, can you implement the IAM solution for us? It requires commitment from their side. It requires change from the customer side. So when I say, have we had difficulty? I would say on every single one. Were we able to overcome those? Almost on all of the implementations, yes, but to varying degree. Sometimes customers are a little bit reluctant to give up what they've been doing. Sometimes uh, it requires that their solution is customized enough that it is not easily integratable with a third party tool. So we've had to do some intermediate steps, put some scripts into place to try and overcome those solutions. So absolutely, every single implementation requires, there is no uh, like a best practice approach. There are guidelines, but there is no cookbook that I can hand over to somebody and say, okay, take this and you can implement all of the solutions the same way. That won't work because your upstream and downstream systems do differ. So we need to make those particular adjustments so that we are able to tweak and come up. That's the reason the IAM niche skill requires some skilled resources. You cannot have somebody you pick up from the street and just tell them, hey, can you become an IAM expert? No. It requires some training, it requires uh, some direction to make sure you're headed in the right way of handling things. And I think EC Council can possibly help you get there.
Thank you, Tejas, for answering that question. We'll take last question for the day. What are the emerging risks that organizations should be aware of and plan for by Irovo?
Yeah. Emerging risk, the biggest thing is protect your privileges. You don't want somebody to control your, if you are in a manufacturing space or a industry, you don't want somebody going and uh, modifying your OT devices so they start producing things which they are not able to produce. If you are working with an oil and gas, somebody can get hold of the privileges and they can take to spill oil in an ocean. Somebody can go and just change a water component like in a chemical factory, which will mess up your solution mix. So your privileges are your keys to the kingdom. It's like how strongly you protect your PIN numbers, how strongly you protect your passcodes for your phones. Your corporate identities need to be protected. Otherwise, the risk is just that little uh, password. If somebody gets access to, they can cause a lot of damage. And unfortunately, this damage can even show up under your name if your account was compromised. So people don't realize, but if 37% of the breaches are caused by stolen identity privileges, it's a pretty significant risk when it comes to protecting your own identities. We all understand more the identities we have. We just let's just take a simple thing as like you're using 5 different devices to connect into Amazon account, and somebody got access to one of your devices. That means all your 5 devices where you're using Amazon can be compromised because you are technically tied to that one ID. And that one ID can be used. And if somebody is smart enough and they know how to get access to a particular device, and then they can uh, escalate and they can escalate in terms of they can escalate their own privileges and they are able to traverse across your environment, they can actually cause a lot more damage by just piggybacking onto your own credentials and moving across the environment. So, hope this helps.
Thank you so much, Tejas. Thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Tejas, for such an insightful presentation and for the great knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. Before we conclude the webinar, Tejas, would you like to give a small message to our audiences?
No, I think what I would say is where the trends are headed, where the business is headed, identity and access management. If you guys are starting your careers and other things, I would say strongly that IAM is on the upward path, upward trajectory. Actually, I am even introducing this course in UT Dallas from next semester because there is lots and lots of buzz around IAM. People need to understand the trends, people need to understand the risk associated with identities and the things which you can do with your own identities. So, identity, as I said, has become the center of the universe, especially when people are no longer confined to the network. So this trend is definitely something which is going to grow more and more. More identity analytics, more governance, more privileged access management is needed as more devices are coming out. So um, definitely something. If you are thinking about a career, this is definitely an area to look at.
Thank you, Tejas, for the message to our audiences. Before we end the session, I would like to announce our next Cyber Talk session, Trends in the Cyber Insurance Market, Challenges and Opportunities, which is scheduled for September 28, 2023. This is an expert presentation by Matt Corina, Head of Global Cyber at TransUnion. To register for this session, please do go visit our website www.eccu.edu/cybertalks. The link is given in the chat section. Hope to see you all on 28th September. With this, we end the session. You may now disconnect your lines. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tejas. Pleasure
Thank
having
you.
you.